counterintuitively.
What I see what happens is when you're providing that service and you're getting paid 30, 60, 90 days, you're putting all of the bargaining chips into the person who's already received the goods.
Yes.
And so, they could stall, and now you're beholden to them.
Right.
So whatever, if you borrowed and you're waiting on that money, you're putting yourself at kind of at that huge risk.
Good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
Pretty good. Back for another episode of Expandable. Excited about this. The question is, when does it make sense to bootstrap expansion versus getting outside financing? What comes to mind?
First, you got to bootstrap anything that, there is no history, there's no proven track record, and it's a start. I mean, you got to bootstrap.
Yeah.
You don't get, you're not getting financing.
Just too much risk for you and the bank. Yeah. Or
whoever.
Right.
I mean, who's going to give you money on something that's not proven? So yes, you're going to have to.
Well, there's a lot of people in California that doling it
all
out
day long. Yeah. So then, just if you are able to get in front of VCs, then yes, go in front of California VC. So
yeah. But for this example, we're talking about financing, like debt. And we're also talking about not startup. We're talking about second stage, like you've got product market fit, you're growing, you've had some success, you got a track record.
Correct.
And now you're wanting to expand, right? And this could be, I think it depends on the type of business you're in.
It does. And then how quickly you're costing your product, how quickly you can turn it over. Because if you're able to turn over your product very quickly and your cash flows quickly, then, maybe you just, that's your cash flow to grow.
Yeah. Right.
You don't necessarily have to go out and get financing.
Yeah.
You just stay within that speed.
Yeah. I think if you have a solid, if your financials are solid, your cash flow is solid, and you have like inventory you have to buy, or you have something that is going to take a big drawdown on cash, that's a good place for financing to come in, because it helps you to make that lift for the period of time that you projected.
And obviously the cost of financing.
Right.
So you're going to get better cost once you have proven track record. You've got some historical transactions that can show your future.
Right.
I mean, I think the day and age is here. I got an idea. Here's my, here's my projections.
Yeah.
Okay. That means nothing.
Like what comes to mind is, I know there's a company you guys worked with. I can't remember the name, down in South Florida, and they did scaffolding rentals. It was a great company, and they had all their processes down, like very well run organization. And so if you took that as an example, if they were to expand and say, take on a new territory and go like from Fort Lauderdale to Miami,
I thought they hit the timing extremely well on their expansion.
The market,
yeah, I thought they did very well, and they were able to buy, the asset that they were able to continually rent out. So that was the perfect time for expansion of them.
Yes,
great
business model,
correct,
good track record, and then if they go to expand, of course, they have a warehouse, so that's where they're going to have to keep.
And the rent of that scaffolding, how much. How quickly the payback was from actual purchasing it and ownership. So they could service that very quickly and pay it off very quickly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great business in general.
Yeah.
But if they're looking to go to new territory, they're looking at buying probably a warehouse, because they've got their model nailed, buying a warehouse and putting a bunch of inventory in it, and then hiring accordingly. Due to the contracts that they have or the connections they have in the GC world or contract.
Yeah, they were able to deploy as soon as they got additional scaffolding. They were able to deploy it right away.
So that's, I think, a case where for the business owner and the lender, it makes perfect sense. You can look at this sort of, I don't want to simplify it, but business in a box. Like it's all well put together.
You had track record,
and then you can duplicate it.
Yeah.
But now if it's different kind of business, like a service type of business where, and there's lots of service businesses, but, one that requires people, not necessarily equipment and technology, you're banking on going into a new market or whatever that expansion looks like and replicating what you've done in this current market, which can sometimes be difficult because, market conditions are different wherever you're going, even if it's down the street. I mean, this in banking.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, you
every location
you have a
different.
location, but it's mostly just people that you have to put in a new location. Yeah.
But it's kind of weird in banking because you'll have locations of branches, but yet, they don't have to be located in that area to open an account with you. And people generally don't come in a bank branch anymore to open up an account.
Right.
So,
there's a certain very, small percentage businesses that need that, in-person service.
And it depends on the area too. Metro areas, typically not.
Right. Yeah. So, I think a lot of this depends on the business, but as we've kind of outlined, with, I think, again, back to service businesses, if it's just hiring more bodies, that can be a bootstrap,
Correct. And then, there's so much unknown when you're adding bodies in your service, and the cost is kind of built into there. Yeah, I don't think that's an area one where you're going to finance.
Right.
But
and typically you're going to sell ahead of those hires. And create the new cash flow and create that problem that you're solving by hiring someone.
Yeah.
I don't know. There is a case for if you needed an office, which I think has become a lot less important, but if you needed an office, that there's some financing there. There's some outlay.
Well, then on the service side, it's going to be once you establish the contracts and you have her going, and then now you've got demonstrated ability, and that's at the point where you can get financing.
Right. Yeah, because that's going to be much more digestible for a lender.
Correct. Then you've got more, proof, and you've got some continuation and people. Yeah.
Yeah. So part of this conversation is making everything look good in reality, but additionally for the lender, because a lender needs to look at this with, lending eyes and say, hey, is this stomachable for what our risk tolerance is as a bank or a lender?
Yeah.
And what you in reality are looking to do objectively, because they're looking at it from the outside, versus what you might be seeing and feeling in your business and how you think things are going and how the market's going. Those are two different things.
They always are.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the other point that I had was, is just an issue of cash flow in and of itself. What will it take to scale to the next phase of growth? Is your cash flow stable and consistently growing?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, be it, high inventory equipment or not, what does that look like? Can you draw down on your cash flow and it not impede growth, or not impede just operations in general in order to expand?
So, yeah, we're trying to get at here. It's kind of a fine line on how much to borrow for the future in regards to that. So, I'm on the side of caution where you need that buffer zone in order to do that. But, you borrow against your strong assets. You don't borrow against, hiring service-oriented people. It just,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, what I'm saying is cash flow has to be strong and robust, but I really am sort of implying too that there's reserves, because cash flow allows you to have reserves and in a future, like there's a runway there that can, you can fail on that runway as you scale up.
Now let's think about how many businesses are you waiting? What would be the turnaround, of cash flow? Is it 3 months, waiting that you've delivered on your product or your service, and you've got a 60-day, 90-day turnaround from what you start, once you implement the cash.
Yeah, right.
That's something I think you really need to pay close attention to. But I wouldn't want to get in too much of industry going past 30, 60, 90 days.
Oh, yeah. And honestly, if you are if you are in an industry that is typical and that's how most companies operate, you might want to look at changing that in the customer's eyes, because there are ways to do that create more demand. Counterintuitively.
Well, what I see, what happens is when you're providing that service and you're getting paid 30, 60, 90 days, you're putting all of the bargaining chips into the person who's already received the goods.
Yes.
And so, they could stall, and now you're beholden to them.
Right.
So if you borrowed and you're waiting on that money, you're putting yourself at kind of at that huge risk of that.
When you're talking about this, do you have a business type of business in mind, like industry?
What happens is, a lot of times when you see startup businesses, they're growing big, and then they go to, say, a tier, what they think is a high caliber company that they want to work for. The brands that everybody, seems, I did work for Disney, I did work for Walmart, or,
Okay. Yeah.
companies that scale, you've got to really, look at the fine line, because you may not get paid 30, 60, 90 days, and you've paid your employees because it was a service side that you had to do. Maybe it was manufacturing that you had to build for them, but you've had to pay your employees for weeks at a time. And so your margins were very small. You weren't making 30% on your employee cost. You're filling that in, and 30% of the product. So you've got to really pay attention and not necessarily go after that lines of business.
Yeah. That's good.
Because you're putting it in them at the end of the day, be like, I'm not as happy with the product. It is, you didn't deliver here. And then you're stuck and need a percentage of that money now. So you're willing, okay, I'll settle for 5% less, 2% less.
That's good.
And it puts you in that position. So,
so
that's what makes me think of. And, it's like in my world, I've always got to be afraid of vendors holding software and data and holding that hostage. So don't extend your cash flow out.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great path to go down. And I want to end this episode here, and let's continue this conversation in the next episode.
Gotcha.